My children dragged me to court at my 80th year birthday for my house, but I shocked them with one move. On the day I turned 80, instead of a celebration, my children dragged me to court, fighting over the house I built with my own hands. As I sat there, frail but steady, they argued like vultures circling prey. They thought I was weak, finished, but with one unexpected move, I turned the entire courtroom on its head. This is the story of how, on my birthday, my children tried to take everything and how I shocked them all. Hello family, welcome back. Before we begin, I have a small but heartfelt request. Please subscribe. Your support is what keeps these stories alive. Every time you click that button, you're helping us share voices that would otherwise be forgotten and stories that deserve to be heard. And in the comments, tell us where you're watching from, because together we are not just telling stories, we are keeping hope alive. I have lived long enough to know that life is not measured in years, but in scars, the kind you carry quietly inside, hidden from the world. At 80, people look at me and see only a frail old woman, hair turned white, hands trembling from time. They don't see the battles I fought, the nights I went hungry so my children could eat, the days I carried bricks on my back just to build the house that now stands at the center of our war. That house, my house, wasn't just walls and windows. It was my dream made flesh. A dream Richard and I pieced together one sacrifice at a time. Richard, my late husband. He wasn't perfect, stubborn, quick-tempered, but he had a worker's hands and a builder's heart. In the early days, when we were just newlyweds with nothing but hope, we'd walk by an empty plot of land and whisper to each other, "One day we'll build there. One day, Margaret, our children will run across our own floors." That day came slowly. Too slowly, some might say. While others our age bought new cars and fancy clothes, we lived on second-hand things. Richard worked construction sites by day, odd jobs by night. I scrubbed floors for wealthier families, ironed their dresses, polished their silverware, and went home with aching bones, but just enough money to add another brick to our dream. Every nail, every beam of wood in that house was earned with sweat and hunger. I remember carrying cement in buckets while pregnant with David, my eldest. The neighbours laughed, said I was mad, said no woman should break her back like that. But when I stood in the doorway of that half-finished home, dust on my face and the sound of Richard's hammer echoing through the skeleton walls, I didn't feel madness, I felt purpose. And when the house was finally done, simple, modest, but ours, it wasn't just shelter, it was proof. Proof that sacrifice and love could build something permanent in a world where nothing else lasts. My children were raised within those walls. David, Susan and James. 3 names, 3 lives I thought would be my legacy. I poured myself into them, the way I once poured concrete into that foundation. David, my firstborn, from the moment he learned to walk, he carried himself with the seriousness of a man. He helped his father, held my hand when I was weary. To the outside world, he grew into a man who seemed steady, responsible. People admired him, but I knew him differently. Beneath the surface, David always wanted more than what we gave, more than what we had. He saw sacrifice not as love, but as limitation. Then there was Susan, my middle child. Beautiful, elegant even as a girl. She had a way of making every dress look like it belonged on a runway. Susan dreamed of a life far above our station, and though I worked tirelessly to give her opportunities, she carried shame like a shadow. Shame of me, shame of her father's calloused hands, shame of the modest home that others called humble, but she called small. She smiled in public, kissed my cheek, called me mother sweetly, but behind closed doors I saw the contempt flicker in her eyes. And James, my youngest. Oh, James, he had Richard's charm, that easy smile that could melt hearts. But charm is a dangerous gift. It gave him confidence without responsibility. He gambled with life the way others gambled with cards, and soon he gambled with cards too. Debt followed him like a curse, and though I bailed him out more times than I can count, he never saw the weight it added to my shoulders. To him, I was the safety net that would always catch his fall. Still, I loved them. God knows I loved them all. In public, they were perfect children. At church, they spoke of me as the strongest woman they knew. On holidays, they boasted to their friends about how their mother sacrificed everything for us. They clinked glasses in my honor, raised toasts to my resilience. People looked at me with admiration because of the words my children spoke. And in those moments, I almost believed the illusion myself, that they truly cherished me, that beneath their flaws, love anchored us all. But illusions are delicate things. It takes only one careless word, one unguarded moment to shatter them. It happened one evening, not long before my 80th birthday. Susan had come to visit. She wore her usual perfume, the expensive kind that clings to every corner of the room, announcing her presence before she even speaks. She was on the phone, pacing my living room, her heels clicking against the wooden floor Richard once polished with his own hands. I was in the kitchen, stirring soup, my hearing not as sharp as it used to be, but sharp enough to catch her words. Mother's house is just sitting there, an old relic, living in an old relic. She doesn't need it. She's clinging to the past, standing in the way of progress. Once she's gone, David and I will take care of it. James doesn't need to know the details. Her laughter followed, cold, dismissive. I froze, the wooden spoon trembling in my hand. My daughter's voice, the child I once rocked to sleep, the girl I protected from bullies, was mocking me, calling me an old relic. I wanted to walk out, to confront her, to ask her how the walls that sheltered her could be dismissed so easily. But I didn't. Instead, I stood silently, soup bubbling over, tears streaming down my wrinkled face where she could not see. I thought of the years I had denied myself new shoes so she could wear the best, the times I took food from my own plate to make sure she had enough, the nights I stayed awake, sewing her school uniforms under a dim light, pricking my fingers raw, praying she would walk proudly into her future. And now I was just an obstacle, a burden, a relic. That was the night I realized something terrifying. Love, no matter how deeply given, does not guarantee loyalty. Blood ties do not always bind. Sometimes they choke. I wiped my face, straightened my back, and returned to the living room as though I had heard nothing. Susan ended her call and smiled at me. That polished smile she wore so well. She kissed my cheek, told me how much she loved me, how beautiful the soup smelled. I smiled back. But inside, a quiet storm had begun to brew. They thought I was blind, deaf, too old to notice. They thought age had dulled me. But that night, I understood the truth. My children, my own flesh and blood, were circling me like vultures, waiting for me to fall so they could feast on the house Richard and I built. And though I said nothing, though I held my silence like a knife pressed against my own throat, I made myself a vow. They will not win. Not like this. Because the family I built may have turned against me. But I am still Margaret. And I am not finished yet. If you haven't subscribed yet, we'd love for you to join our community by hitting the subscribe button. Through our stories, we build hope and give a future to children and women who have been abused all over the world. Motivate us by subscribing and turning on your notification bell so you never miss a story that matters. Also, let us know in the comments, where are you watching from and how did this story speak to you? I've often been told that old age is a blessing, that it brings peace, wisdom, a gentle slowing of life's pace. Perhaps that is true for some, but for me, old age has felt more like being surrounded by shadows, shadows of the past, shadows of the children I raised, shadows of the love I thought was unshakable. My suffering did not come all at once. It came slowly, like cracks in a wall, tiny at first, invisible to anyone passing by, but spreading deeper each day until the foundation itself trembled. It began with David. He came to me one evening, papers in his hands, wearing that calm, confident smile he always carried in public. David has a way of speaking that makes you feel foolish if you question him, as though his words are ironclad truth. "Mother," he said, sliding the papers across the table. "Just some routine documents. Legal maintenance, you know how it is. I'll take care of everything. You just need to sign here." I squinted at the words on the page. My eyesight isn't what it used to be, but I could still make out enough to feel unease. The language was heavy, full of terms I didn't understand. "What is this for?" I asked. "Just tax protection," David assured, patting my hand. "Everyone does it at this stage. It'll make things easier for you and for us later." For us later. He pressed a pen into my trembling hand. His tone was warm, but his eyes carried an urgency I had not seen before, like a man in a hurry to claim what wasn't his yet. I hesitated, but the weight of his expectation pressed down on me. I signed. My own name, written in shaky letters, felt like a betrayal of myself. He kissed my forehead after, thanking me for trusting him. But as he folded those papers, I couldn't shake the sense that I had just handed over more than ink on a page. Not long after, James brought his own brand of ruin. James, with his easy smile, his soft voice, the son who always called me Mama instead of Mother, as though the word itself was meant to soften me. "Mama," he said one afternoon, avoiding my gaze, "I just need a little help, temporary. I promise it's nothing major." What he didn't tell me was that he had already used my name, my reputation, my stability as collateral for his debts. I discovered it when a stern man knocked on my door, demanding payment on a loan I knew nothing about. My heart nearly stopped as I read the documents in his hand. James had signed papers with my name printed beneath his. Collateral. That word struck me harder than any insult could. To him, I wasn't his mother anymore. I was just a safety net, an old tree to be stripped for firewood when the cold set in. I confronted James later, shaking, tears threatening to spill. "How could you?" I asked. He rubbed the back of his neck, sheepish but not ashamed. "It's just money, Mama. You've always been stable. You'll bounce back. Besides, you know I'll pay it back." But I knew he wouldn't. His debts were holes in the ground he kept falling into, and I was nothing more than a rope he yanked until it frayed. And then, as if betrayal wasn't enough, Susan delivered humiliation. She had invited me to a social gathering, one of her grand dinners where the wine flowed freely, and everyone wore clothes that looked too expensive to touch. I wore my best dress, simple and faded, the same one I had saved for years of special occasions. At the table, someone asked Susan about her upbringing, about the house she grew up in. Susan laughed lightly, her glass raised, and said, "Oh, we were just lucky, really. Right place, right time. My parents managed to scrape something together." Scrape. That word stung like a whip. I wanted to stand up, to tell them how I scrubbed other people's toilets, how I starved myself so she could eat steak, how I carried bricks with swollen ankles so that she would have walls around her. But I sat there swallowing my pain while Susan's friends nodded in admiration, none the wiser. Luck, she called it. Not sacrifice, not sweat, not blood, luck. That night I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, and memory carried me backward. I remembered the mornings I rose before dawn, slipping out quietly so my children could sleep while I scrubbed office floors downtown. I remembered eating crusts of bread in alleys while saving every coin for their school fees. I remembered the sting of hunger as I told myself, "Just one more year, Margaret. One more year and things will be better for them." And things were better for them. David wore fine suits to school while I wore shoes with holes. Susan had dance lessons while I mended old dresses. James had toys imported from abroad while I patched my only winter coat 3 winters in a row. Every sacrifice I made became their comfort. Every hunger I endured became their feast. And yet, in their eyes now, it was all luck. It was Mrs. Thompson, my neighbour and oldest friend, who finally lifted the veil fully. She came to me one afternoon, her voice hushed, her eyes worried. "Margaret," she said, sitting across from me at the kitchen table, "I don't know how to tell you this, but you need to know. I overheard David and Susan speaking. They're planning something." My chest tightened. "What do you mean?" "They're talking about declaring you mentally unfit," she said, her voice trembling. "If they do that, the court could hand over control of your property to them. They'd have the power to sell the house, everything. They think you're too old, too fragile to fight back." I stared at her, the words circling in my head like vultures. Mentally unfit. The children I had raised, the children who grew under my roof, were now plotting to strip me of my mind before it was even gone. I thanked her, though my lips felt numb. After she left, I sat alone in the dim light of my kitchen, the ticking clock louder than my own heartbeat. The walls around me seemed to close in, the very house Richard and I built, turning into a battlefield I had never imagined. I thought of my children again, my once little boy who used to tug at my dress asking for one more story, my little girl who twirled in hand-sewn dresses I stayed up all night to finish, my youngest, who clung to me when nightmares came. And now? They saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to erase, a wallet to raid, a house to divide. That night, I sat in my rocking chair, the shadows long across the floor, my hands trembling not from age, but from anger. I whispered to myself, barely audible, but strong enough to fill the room, "They think I'm weak, but they've forgotten who raised them." And as the words left my lips, I felt something stir inside me. Not weakness, not despair, but fire. Because betrayal may cut deepest when it comes from your own blood, but it also awakens something fierce. And if my children thought I would surrender quietly, they were about to learn a lesson only a mother could teach. 80 years. That was the number carved into my bones, carried in my breath. I thought it would be a day of joy, a day when my children would gather around me with laughter and warmth. I imagined candles glowing on a cake, my grandchildren's voices singing, neighbours stopping by with blessings. But instead of a celebration, I was handed papers. The knock came early that morning, sharp and cold. A man in a dark suit stood at my door, his face expressionless. "Mrs. Margaret Harris," he asked. I nodded, confused. He placed a thick envelope in my hands. "Consider yourself served," he said flatly, and walked away without another word. My hands trembled as I tore it open. At first, the words blurred, my eyes unable to focus. But as I read, my heart dropped into silence. Petition for guardianship, application for transfer of property control. My children, David, Susan, and James, had filed against me. On my 80th birthday, they weren't planning a party, they were dragging me to court. The courthouse was colder than I remembered. The marble floors echoed with every step I took, my cane tapping in uneven rhythm. People stared, some with pity, others with curiosity. A frail old woman, shuffling in to fight her own children. I sat at the defendant's table, my heart pounding louder than the gavel. My children sat across from me, polished and poised, their lawyer whispering in their ears. David was the first to speak. His voice carried through the room, confident, commanding, as though he were the father and I the child. "Your Honour," he began, his tone solemn. "This is not about greed, this is about responsibility. My mother is 80 years old. She forgets things, misplaces bills, neglects her own safety. We love her, but she's no longer capable of managing her affairs." Lies, every word, but spoken with such certainty that even I almost believed him. He painted me as senile, irresponsible, a woman who couldn't tell night from day. He mentioned signed documents as proof of my carelessness, conveniently forgetting that he had tricked me into signing them. Then came Susan. Oh, Susan. She dabbed her eyes with a tissue, her voice breaking in practiced sobs. "Your Honour, this isn't easy for me. I love my mother dearly. She's the strongest woman I know. But lately, I'm afraid for her. She forgets to lock the doors, leaves the stove on, misplaces money. We just want to protect her. Please understand, it's not about us. It's about her safety." The crocodile tears fell perfectly, each drop a dagger to my chest. People in the audience murmured sympathetically. They believed her. They saw a devoted daughter, not the same woman who once mocked me as an old relic. And then James stood, my youngest, my baby. "Mama," he said, looking at me with feigned sorrow, "this hurts me more than anything. But I've seen you struggle. You repeat stories without realizing. You wander at night. I can't just stand by and watch you slip away. Please, let us take care of things before it's too late." I wanted to scream, to shout that he was lying, that he was the one drowning in debts, not me. But my voice caught in my throat, my body sat frozen, frail in appearance, and the courtroom swallowed their lies as if they were gospel. The judge nodded gravely, scribbling notes. With every word my children spoke, I felt myself shrinking smaller, my dignity stripped layer by layer. And what did I do? I sat silently. I clutched the edge of the table, my knuckles white, and let the storm rage. Inside, my heart screamed, but my lips would not move. To the world I looked beaten, a tired old woman too weak to defend herself. The whispers in the audience stung worse than whips. "Poor thing, she's lost her mind. Her children are so noble, stepping in like this. It's sad, but it's for the best. They didn't see betrayal, they saw duty. They didn't see vultures, they saw saviours." The humiliation was unbearable. As I sat there, I remembered the years I spent shielding these very children from humiliation. The time Susan failed an exam and cried herself to sleep, and I told the neighbours she had been ill, protecting her pride. The time David stole money as a boy, and I worked double shifts to quietly repay it without anyone knowing. The time James was caught sneaking out at night, and I lied to the school to save his record. I had shielded them from shame, and now on my birthday, they paraded me through it like a criminal. The judge cleared his throat. "Given the testimonies and the evidence presented, I am inclined to consider granting guardianship to the petitioners." My breath caught. The words echoed like a death sentence. my house, my life's work, the last piece of Richard I had left, all of it slipping from my grasp, handed to the very children who had betrayed me. The gavel hovered in the judge's hand. My children exchanged subtle smiles, thinking victory was theirs. And then the judge turned to me, his voice cut through the fog. "Mrs. Harris, do you have anything you'd like to say before I make my decision?" The courtroom fell silent. All eyes turned to me, the frail, silent mother, the supposed relic. David leaned back in his chair, smug. Susan pressed her tissue to her lips, her crocodile tears still glistening. James looked at me with rehearsed sorrow, certain I would remain quiet. Slowly, I placed my hands on the table and pushed myself up. My legs trembled, but I stood. The room seemed to blur, but I steadied myself, refusing to show weakness now. I reached into my handbag and pulled out a folded document. The paper felt heavy, heavier than any brick I had ever carried. I gripped it tightly, my voice quiet but steady as I lifted my head. "Yes, Your Honour," I said. "I do have something to say." The courtroom held its breath, and for the first time that day it was not my children who commanded the room. It was me. The courtroom was frozen, silent except for the sound of my shaky breaths. All eyes were on me, on the frail old woman they had written off, the relic they thought had no fight left. I gripped the folded document in my hand like a weapon, my fingers trembling, but not from fear. No, this tremble came from the fire burning inside me, the fire they had tried to bury. David smirked, certain I would mumble a few incoherent words and sit back down. Susan dabbed her eyes with her tissue, already rehearsing her victory smile. James looked away, his guilt gnawing but hidden behind a mask of sorrow. But when I straightened my back, when I lifted my chin and looked directly at the judge, the smirks began to falter. "Your Honour," I said, my voice steadier than I expected, "I have sat here in silence, listening to lies spill from the mouths of the very children I raised. They paint me as weak, confused, incapable. But let me remind this court, I am Margaret Harris. I built the house they are fighting over, brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice. And while they think age has dimmed my mind, I have been 2 steps ahead all along." Gasps rippled through the room. I unfolded the paper slowly, deliberately, the sound of crackling pages filling the silence. "This, Your Honour," I continued, holding it up, "is the deed to the house. The one they've spent weeks scheming over, the one they've dragged me here to steal. But what they don't know is that years ago I saw this day coming. I knew greed when it began to show in their eyes. And so I made a decision. I transferred the deed, not to them, not to anyone who could sell it, but to a charitable trust under my name. This house, my house, will stand long after me. It will shelter those in need, not vultures who circle the living." The courtroom erupted. Murmurs flew like sparks, shocked whispers, gasps of disbelief. The judge raised his hand for silence, but the damage was already done. My children's faces twisted with panic, their victory slipping through their fingers like water. David shot up from his seat. "That's impossible! She doesn't know what she's saying." I turned to him sharply, my voice cutting through his protest. "Quiet, David. You think Ida didn't know about the papers you pushed in front of me, the so-called routine documents? I may be old, but I am not blind. You tricked me, hoping to steal what you did not earn, but I kept the originals safe, and now your fraudulent attempts are worthless." The audience gasped again. David's face went pale. Then I turned to James, my sweet, reckless boy who had mistaken my love for weakness. "And you, James, do you deny using my name to secure loans? Do you deny the collectors who came knocking at my door, demanding money for debts I never made?" James's eyes widened, his lips trembling. "Mother, I only did it because you thought I would clean up your mess, as I always have," I said, my voice sharper than I ever thought it could be again. "But no more. I have kept every letter, every receipt, every proof of the debts you tied to my name, and now everyone here will know what you have done." The judge's gavel struck, demanding order, but the whispers swelled louder. James sank into his seat, his head in his hands. Finally I turned to Susan, my daughter, so polished, so elegant, who thought her words behind closed doors would never see the light of day. "And Susan." I reached into my handbag again and pulled out a small device. I pressed a button, and her own voice filled the courtroom. "Mother's house is just sitting there, an old relic living in an old relic. She doesn't need it. Once she's gone, David and I will take care of it. James doesn't need to know the details. The room froze. Gasps echoed as Susan's face drained of colour. I let the recording play until her laughter rang out, cruel and mocking. Then I switched it off and slipped it back into my bag. I looked at her, my eyes burning. You called me an old relic. You mocked the sacrifices that gave you every privilege you flaunt. And now the world will hear your words for what they are. Not concern, not love, but contempt. Susan stammered, tears falling again, but this time there were no sympathetic murmurs. No one in that room believed her anymore. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the sound of my voice as I turned back to the judge. Your Honour, my children are not here out of love or duty. They are here out of greed. They speak of my safety, but what they want is my house, my life's work. They see me not as their mother, but as an obstacle standing in the way of their inheritance. But I will not be erased, not while I still have breath in my body. I paused, my voice softening, though it carried more power than ever before. Children are supposed to be blessings, not vultures. Wealth is not a measure of love, and betrayal leaves deeper scars than poverty ever could. I raised them with everything I had, and in return, they tried to strip me of my dignity. But today their masks have fallen. Let the world see them for what they are. The judge's gavel came down hard. Order, he shouted, though even his voice quivered under the weight of the truth now laid bare. David sat rigid, his jaw clenched, his eyes full of rage but powerless. James wept silently, his debts exposed. Susan shook her head, whispering excuses no one cared to hear. As for me, I stood tall, not frail, not broken, but whole. I gathered my papers, placed them back into my bag, and lifted my chin as the judge dismissed the case with finality. This petition is denied, he said firmly. Control of the property remains with Mrs. Harris. Furthermore, I advise the petitioners to consider the gravity of their actions. The sound of the gavel striking wood was like thunder, final and undeniable. I walked out of that courtroom slowly, each step steady, my cane tapping in rhythm. The whispers followed me, not of pity but of awe. And behind me, my children sat in disgrace, their reputations shattered, their schemes exposed. They had come to strip me bare, but left with nothing, empty-handed and unmasked before the world. When I reached the doors, I stopped, turned back once more, and spoke the words that had been waiting on my tongue since the day they betrayed me. They thought they could take everything from me at 80 years old, but what they didn't know is that the woman who built them could also break them. Then I walked into the sunlight, not as a victim, but as a mother who had survived betrayal and reclaimed her dignity.